Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Suzanne, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. Today's discussion is about CMMC compliance made affordable, budgeting and enclaving tips. We're here to talk about how small defense contractors can meet CMMC 2.0 requirements without breaking the bank. Our goal today is to show you how smart budgeting, scoping, and enclave strategies can significantly reduce your CMMC compliance cost. We'd like to take a moment to thank our co-sponsors for promoting this event today. We have numerous MEP and Apex accelerators co-sponsoring our webinar today. Your local Apex accelerators are available to bridge the gap between your business and the government. Apex accelerators are here to assist you with local, state, and federal contracting. MEPs provide tools and resources to help U.S. manufacturers succeed. Each center connects manufacturers with government agencies, universities and research facilities, and trade associations that foster growth and innovation. Contact your local Apex Accelerator or MEP for more information on how they can help your business succeed. I'm joined today by two of our regular panelists, Scott Dawson, President of Core Business Solutions, who's helped hundreds of small businesses prepare for various compliance requirements, and also Rick Crick, Director of Security Solutions here at Core with deep experience implementing CMMC-ready environments. So let's dive in. And today, because I know that we have a lot of content, we'll be answering all your questions in the chat. So please put them in there and we'll get back to you. Okay, so we've heard a lot of buzz about how expensive CMMC can be, but let's unpack that in real terms. Rick, how expensive is CMMC for small contractors, and where does the perception come from that it's unaffordable?
Well, that's a great question to start with this morning, Suzanne. If you look at the cost for a C3PAO assessment, it ranges anywhere from $50,000 to $80,000, depending on your environment. So that is one of the costs that you would incur. Another is involving your technology and the upgrades, implementing things like your MFA, the multi-factor authentication, logging all your information that's happening within your network, securing files, the sharing of files, and those are significant expenses, or can be significant expenses. We don't want to forget any of the consulting support you might have, documentation, and there also is the training of your staff. So those can add to that cost that sometimes can feel overwhelming for you. The good news is you don't have to start everything at one time. You can break that across a period of time, say in your next year. Just spread that out, put together a budget, and it'll help to not make that cost so hard at the beginning. Also, there are additional tools that you can use, things like maybe templates for policies help you. And then once again, you want to narrow your scope. The more you can narrow your scope, the more you can reduce your expense. And that's part of the reason we'll talk a little bit about enclaves moving forward.
Well, great. That's a really helpful overview of why the price tag feels so high. But what exactly are small businesses spending money on when preparing for CMMC? So Scott, when a business prepares for CMMC, where does the money typically go? Can you walk us through the major cost categories?
Yeah, glad to do it, Suzanne. And think of CMMC cost in 5 different buckets. So one is preparation, which is doing an initial gap assessment, putting a plan together, putting a budget together, as Rick recommended. All of that is kind of getting your plan together. You also have there's a strategic part of that. I call it strategic scoping, which is deciding how much CUI documentation you need to manage, how many people need to have access, and what your overall scope is going to be, what equipment, what systems, what devices are going to need to be protected within the scope of your certification. All of that is part of preparation. Then secondly is all the technology piece. So if you need to upgrade your network, because maybe you handle majority of your business is in DoD work, then you're upgrading your network, and then that's where the expenses come into play for firewalls and MFA and securing your email and getting encryption in place and logging, all the different things that Rick had mentioned. But if you're not going to go down that path and you're going to narrow scope down to what's called an enclave or a segmented area, that's another way to think about it, whether you set up that enclave within your network, or you use a third-party enclave, or you use a managed enclave. Different ways you can do that. But if you're going to narrow things down, then you're deciding what direction are we going to go, what vendors are we going to use, what tools are we going to use, and then begin the implementation processes. That part of this can take a lot of time, especially if your company isn't used to meeting these kind of security requirements. Thirdly would be documentation. This is a key part of passing the assessment. So not only will the assessor want to see the technology, they're also going to want to see the backup information in your policies and procedures and other evidence that shows that you're running your system compliant to CMMC. And don't underestimate the amount of documentation. This is a heavy lift. It's an extensive amount of documentation needed. Basically, everything that the assessor is going to ask, they're going to want to see some documented backup information. And that's where, of course, external help like a consultant can help, or templates, to make sure you get all that documentation in place. Fourth would be the assessment. And Rick mentioned that earlier. That's done by a C3PAO, or a certified third-party assessment organization. Those are the companies that provide CMMC assessments. And there's the cost of the assessment. There's the preparation time to get ready for the assessment. If you have the C3PAO do a pre-assessment, kind of an off-the-record assessment early on to give you some, all these times you're using an assessor, you're paying assessor costs. And they are, right now with so much demand, and there's not as enough assessors, fees can be pretty high. So you really need to shop around. But that's certainly a significant expense. And then finally, it doesn't end with the assessment. It doesn't end with certification. In fact, now you need to maintain your system, maintain your documentation, keep your employees trained, make sure your technology stays up to date, and every 3 years, you'll have a reassessment by the C3PAO, and that'll also be an expense. So, you can't think of this as a once and done exercise. It really, is ongoing. So this is kind of if you're going to start to frame out a budget, this would be a good way to structure that. Now, what you're really going to save in all of this is to focus your investment on only what is needed. Now, that doesn't mean you get to pick and choose the security tools you're going to implement, or the security protections, or the level of security. You don't get to choose that. That's dictated by the NIST 800-171 requirements, and CMMC requires that you meet all 110 CMMC or NIST requirements. But where you can focus is on the technology, the people, the systems that are included. If you're going to upgrade your entire network, then that's going to be, one level of expense. If you're going to narrow it down to only a part of your network, to segregate that as an enclave, or use a third-party enclave or service, that would have a different, number of. We really add another zero, or take a zero off of the budget probably. So I think everyone should be looking at, what do we really need, and can we function with a smaller system?
Okay. Well, thanks, Scott. That breakdown is really helpful. But we know that the cost doesn't look the same for each company. So, Rick, what factors make CMMC more or less expensive for a company?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. The first factor, and I would say one of the major factors, deals with scope. When we're looking at scope, we're looking at what systems are involved, what people are involved, how many people are involved. We're looking at what processes are involved. So if we have everything within our network in scope, you'll need more comprehensive controls. If you can isolate CUI, make those boundaries smaller with an enclave, once again, that would be helping you reduce your footprint or your price, your cost, if you will. Some other factors would be, company size, how many people handle CUI. Think of your workflow as it comes into your organization, who all interacts with that controlled unclassified information. The complexity of your IT system or the lack of your IT system. Once again, that would be a factor in determining, this scope, what needs to be included. Another factor would be, have you implemented any of these controls from the NIST 800-171? Some of those will reduce the overhead there. But the bottom line is the smaller the scope, the less costly it will be, or the lower the cost is to implement this solution.
Okay, that totally makes sense. But Scott, let's flip the coin. So what are the risks of not doing CMMC? So could it end up costing a company even more?
Yeah, it largely depends on the nature of the business and how much DoD, work, how many DoD related contracts your company depends upon or is pursuing. If you depend on CMMC or depend on DoD work for your business and you lose those contracts, meaning you're not eligible to bid, of course, that's going to be a cost to your business. And there'll be a day in the next few years where you're not eligible to bid on any DoD contract without a CMMC certification. So that day is coming. A second would be if you have claimed to be compliant or you have gone through an assessment, yet you don't actually meet the requirements. So let's say something goes out of date or you don't keep things up to date or you haven't fully implemented. You can be subject to False Claims Act by the federal government. There are publicized occasions when that is happening, where the government is going to pursue or prosecute companies that are not meeting the requirements, though they claim they are, right? So that's the false claims piece. And then a data breach would, of course, be a cost, right? If you actually have a security breach, your company reputation with your customers or with your market, and cleaning up all the problems and getting your data taken care of, all of that from a breach could be expensive. So if you think about things from a long-term perspective, being strategic with compliance and security can really save money in the long run.
Okay. So let's say a business wants to take a smart, intentional approach. What does that actually look like in practice? Rick, what does a smart CMMC budget look like? How should a small business structure it?
Right. I would start with a 12 to 18 month roadmap. And that roadmap can be broken down into various components. Initially, you would start with a gap assessment. And that gap assessment is going to look at your environment to identify what do you have in place, What don't you have in place? What do I need to do to put these controls in place? So your initial starting point here is to do this gap analysis to find out exactly where you are in meeting the compliance of the NIST 800-171. Secondly, you want to focus on your technology upgrades. Things like MFA, logging, secure file sharing. So you want to focus on the technologies that you need to put in place and start working toward putting those in place. Next, another area would be policy development. As Scott said, documentation is really important. Assessors are going to want to see not only what you're putting in place physically, but also documented that we are addressing those particular areas. Along with training, don't forget that training aspect of it. Training is really important to make sure the appropriate employees that have certain responsibilities related to the NIST requirements are trained. Also think of the budget for the C3PAOs. That assessment is a costly assessment. So you want to work that into your budget. So think of your budget. How much do we need to allocate in this phased approach, which is what you want to do. You want to take a phased approach to, number one, reduce risk, and then spread out the cost so that you're not upfront loading your costs, but spread it out over that 12 to 18 month period of time that we talked about. So those are some of the things that you want to consider as you move forward.
Great. And I would imagine recurring costs too, like
Reoccurring costs, yes. Subscriptions,
Yep.
Monitoring tools.
Sure.
Those are important as well. Good
Yes.
call.
Okay. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about one of the biggest drivers of cost. We've already mentioned it before, but that is the scope. So Scott, let's talk a little bit more about scope. What does it really mean in a CMMC assessment, and why does getting this right matter so much?
Yeah, scope is really everything for CMMC because it establishes the perimeter, or what they call the boundaries, that are exposed to external threats. And so if you have a small scope, you're going to have a smaller footprint. I think Rick had mentioned that earlier. If you have a large scope, meaning, say, your whole network is included, or you have more than one facility and all the facilities are included, then your scope is going to be larger if you need to secure your whole network. So just really nailing that down at the beginning, thinking through the options, understanding the systems and the people that are needing to be involved. And if your whole company handles CUI, as I said, everyone needs to be able to access the drawings and the technical information and contract information, things like that. And it's largely, most people in your company need access to this information, then your whole network's involved, right? But if you can narrow it down, that will mean only part of your network is being assessed. So that's what we mean by scope, or narrowing things down. It's really, you're guiding what parts of your environment are going to need to be secure, and therefore will be assessed by the C3PAO. So that'll affect, the way you implement your controls. You have to implement all of them, but maybe the complexity of implementation is simpler because you have fewer people or devices involved. It'll also can narrow down the documentation and the evidence you need to show the assessor, and the cost of the assessor, because the cost of the assessor is based on the time for the assessment. So the more complicated the system and larger the scope, then the more the time will be involved in the assessment. Could be they need 2 or 3 assessors to conduct the assessment, in some cases. And obviously you can imagine the budget for that's going to go up if the time goes up. Flip side of that is if the scope is narrow, then the time will be less. and the cost would be less. So getting scope right up front is just very, very critical, which is why we put such an emphasis on it as you're getting started on your CMMC journey.
Okay. So once we understand the importance of the scope, how do we define it clearly and accurately? So Rick, can you walk us through how a company should define its scope? What are the steps?
Sure. Let's look at the steps. Step one in particular, identify all flow of CUI. So what we're looking for is how does CUI come into our organizational system? How does it enter in? Once it's in, how do we store it? Or where do we store that CUI when it comes into our organizational system? And then finally, who accesses that CUI? Is it everyone in the company, or is it a few individuals? So who has access to it? Step two is to map the system and the users involved. So once again, we're looking at the workflow. What does our workflow look like? And so we want to identify and map that system. I think thirdly is we need to separate those from the rest of our business, physically or logically. We want to make sure that there is a clear separation between the rest of the company, making sure that only those people that have to have access to it have access. Kind of putting those boundaries there, which is really the step four, document your boundaries clearly. Remember, it's what we say is included is what is going to be assessed. So we want to identify those boundaries, keep those boundaries clear. Those things that are within the boundary are in scope. Those things outside the boundary, we want to keep out of scope. We don't want those two things to blur together. If you do this right, you may only need to include a handful of users in the systems instead of your entire network. So keep it simple. Only those that need to have access, we want to grant access to that CUI.
Okay, great. That all makes sense. So now let's dig into what might be the single most powerful tool in making CMMC affordable, which is enclaving. Rick, I'm going to throw this back to you. So what exactly is an enclave in the CMMC context, and how does it help reduce cost?
Yeah, great question. An enclave is a separate, secure IT environment that's dedicated to handling CUI. So it is a separate area that we want to look at. By design, it isolates the CUI activities from the rest of your system. Once again, we're narrowing this down. We're keeping it in a small container, if you will. Users log into that enclave to process and store anything that is sensitive. Everything else stays out of scope. So we're shrinking those boundaries of that enclave so that only a small subset of our system is involved. When we reduce the number of users, devices, and systems involved, and we're compliant to that boundary, keeping it smaller, simpler, what we're doing is we're also reducing the price. We're keeping it cheaper as we move forward. And that's part of the value of this enclave is by reducing the number of users, systems, and processes, we can keep that cost down. Enclaves are the reason some small business can pass their CMMC level 2 assessments because we're, once again, making it simpler to put in place. And then there's also that speed up your prep time. It cuts down the number of controls you need to implement, makes the assessment much more manageable for the organization. So we can spin that up because there's not as many things involved in that environment. So our time is greatly reduced for enclaves.
Okay. Well, so now that we know what an enclave is, Let's talk about some options for building or buying one. Scott, can you walk us through the different options for implementing an enclave? And how should a small business decide whether to build their own or to use a hosted solution?
Yeah, both are good options in the right situation. And there are really three main options, and there are pluses and minuses to each. So the first would be to build it yourself. And if you have the IT expertise, you have the available experts who can create a segmented part of your network or a separate network, either physical network or in the cloud, and you have someone who understands the technology, understands how to completely segment an area from the rest of your company's environment, and that there's a hard firewall between your company information and the CUI, then that can be a good option. It gives you the most control over the environment. You can tailor it specifically to what you need, but you have a higher cost. So the cost is really going to be in the expertise that's necessary. And a lot of small businesses, they may have someone who handles IT. Maybe it's a part-time responsibility handling IT. That doesn't necessarily mean that individual has the level of knowledge in the area of security and compliance and assessments, because you're really entrusting your process, entrusting your success, if you will, to the person who's going to implement your enclave. So whether you're using someone internal or you're using someone external, so maybe you hire your MSP, managed service provider, who may be a local IT company that is maintaining your systems today. Maybe they have an expert who can set up an enclave to meet the 110 requirements of NIST 800-171. So if you decide you're going to build it yourself, maintain it yourself, I think it hinges on who's going to be responsible to build and maintain that system. And then, by the way, what's your backup plan if that person is not available? And so you really want to think through that, because you don't want to be caught with a system that's been implemented by someone with a lot of experience. That person then, takes another job or some kind of a change occurs, and now you don't have that person. How are you going to maintain your system going forward? So that's I think a major concern if for small businesses, especially, who don't have the depth of IT and security resources available. The second would be a turnkey hosted enclave. So there are systems available, many of them are cloud-based, that are pre-configured. They're fast to deploy. They take very little customization, and they're managed by what CMMC calls a cloud service provider, okay, or CSP. You're going to hear that acronym as you dive into this. So if the company that's hosting the enclave has ownership and responsibility for the enclave, then that enclave has to be what's called FedRAMP moderate or FedRAMP authorized. So FedRAMP is a much more stringent security requirement that your CSP will have to put in place, and you, as the user of that system, will have to validate that the FedRAMP is in place and is being maintained by your provider, but you're really outsourcing the whole process. And that's not the right way to say that. You're outsourcing what the CSP can take responsibility for. You still have responsibilities to implement and maintain a secure workplace and handle documentation properly, but the system itself is maintained externally. That is an option. Now, you're sort of beholden to that company. If you change your mind down the road and you want to go a different path, you're going to have to, you don't own the environment. You don't get to take the secure system with you, as it were. So that's something to consider. You're kind of locked in with that provider. Then the third option would be what's called a managed enclave. And that is, sort of a hybrid in some regards. What that means is you have a managed service provider who specializes in building and maintaining an enclave in your environment. So it's your account, it's your environment, whether that's a physical environment in your facility or it's a virtual environment in the cloud. Your company owns the environment, it's your account. Say it's a Microsoft account or an AWS account. And then the MSP adds their services to that account, maintains that account at the level of security necessary, and you're paying for a service to maintain. So this is a little bit of best of both worlds, because you get the expert that you need, but you also don't give up full control. And I think for a lot of companies, that control piece is going to be important consideration here. So I kind of consider it the middle ground option. You're not having all the responsibility. Say you have your own IT person, you build your own enclave, or you have, all of it outsourced to the cloud service provider. This is one where it's shared responsibility, and you work in cooperation with a qualified MSP who, by the way, is going to be assessed as part of your assessment. So all of the protections that the managed service provider puts in place in your enclave, they will be assessed during your assessment. So your MSP is going to have to be ready and available and trained to participate successfully in your success in your assessment as well. So, different options, different ways to go about it. All three of them help to narrow the scope and can reduce the cost.
Okay, so these are general options, hosted, managed enclaves, but let's get a little more specific. So what does a purpose-built solution for small contractors actually look like? Scott, can you give us an example of a platform that simplifies CMMC without overhauling the entire network?
Well, I can give you one I'm very familiar with, Suzanne, and that is our Core Vault service that we provide to our clients as a managed enclave. Okay, so this is that third option. And Core Vault has been online for a number of years. It is a blend of customer responsibility and control with our responsibility and services. It kind of blends those two things together. So it starts with a secure account in the AWS GovCloud. So if you sign up for Vault, a lot of our clients do, we help get that AWS account set up for your company, kind of walk you through that whole process, make sure you have the control and the ownership, because that'll be part of what the assessor asks about. And then the nice thing about this approach is it allows you to create several different user accounts. Each user account has what's called a virtual desktop. So what does that mean? It means you log in and you're able to use I'm going to put machine in quotes because it's not a physical machine, but you're using a virtual computer where your CUI is kept. It has multi-factor authentication built in. It keeps all the logs and data that you need. The email, which is Outlook, by the way, is encrypted. All of it mapped to the NIST 800-171 requirements. And our services help to make sure that you're addressing actually 82 of the 110 requirements. Once the vault is fully set up and in place, you've kind of knocked out the lion's share of the requirements. That can happen in just a few weeks. And then there are a few things that you do within your facility to get to the 110, which things like visitor logs, making sure your people are trained, making sure that everyone understands what CUI is and how it needs to be protected. Those type of things, which computers you can access the vault from, things like that. And so we act as your MSP. So in some cases, because this is a completely segregated environment, you might have two MSPs. You might have one for your company network and one for your vault. Okay, and we specialize in providing those services for the vault, which make sure that it meets the requirements, because we have that training and the qualifications to meet the CMMC requirements. So the best part of it is you don't have to rebuild your network. You don't have to build your own enclave, you get to keep control. And it shrinks the scope and it shrinks the cost. It's a very cost-effective way to do this, saves a lot of time, simplifies compliance. Now, these benefits are going to be somewhat similar to other providers of other enclaves, but you really want to make sure you're working with a partner that has the experience and provides the setup in the way that you want to manage your enclave. For example, if you want to maintain some control over your account and make sure that if you want to go a different direction, you still have your account and your documents accessible to you. That managed enclave is a better way to go, and the vault is a great option. We'd love to show it to you. Enough of a commercial there, Suzanne.
Well, it sounds like a great option. So, of course, even with really good tools, there's some risks involved if they're not used properly. So, Rick, what are some common mistakes that companies make when creating or selecting an enclave?
That is a great question. Over the years, I've seen some common mistakes. I think the first one is assuming that the rest of their system are out of scope when they really aren't. What I mean by that is, we have this enclave, and we all of a sudden decide that we have to print material. We've now just left that enclave and we've entered into your network, and we hadn't really thought about that. Another example of that would be not blocking downloads from the enclave. So once again, the moment I transfer that CUI, that documentation from out of that enclave, I now pull in the rest of my network, all the devices that are associated with that network, and whoever might have access to it. So not blocking those downloads could cause you some issues there. Another area that I've seen is using non-compliant cloud tools that don't fully isolate CUI. So once again, there could be some requirements that if data is being accessed by these tools or information is being stored, there are maybe some FedRAMP requirements associated with that. So you want to be careful in that area as well, some of the cloud-based tools that you're using. Choosing a provider that isn't CMMC aligned or doesn't share their responsibility matrix. You want to be aware of that. Not all providers are the same. Some of them have absolutely no idea what CMMC is. Not necessarily a criticism, it just isn't an area that they have worked in. So just make sure that you choose the right provider there. And once again, we mentioned it a little bit ago, always ask for a shared responsibility matrix. Making sure that you identify who's responsible for what. That's going to be key in that assessment process. And if you are storing data in the cloud, you need to make sure that that cloud provider is FedRAMP authorized or equivalent. So those are some things that a lot of times you don't think about, and you really do need to think about those, and it can lead to a mistake and not being compliant to the NIST 800-171.
Sure. Okay, Scott, in keeping with cost discussion here, how can businesses keep their endpoint costs low? So what options help keep workstations out of scope, for example?
Yeah, great question. I noticed you guys in the studio there have laptops in front of you. So let's picture. I just want to kind of illustrate kind of what we're talking about here. But if, let's say, you both wanted to log into an enclave from those laptops, the question is, when you open the document that is in the enclave, is that laptop immediately in scope because you opened it to view? Because as you know, when you look on, often when you look at things like, say, through an internet browser, to be able to see the document, it downloads onto your laptop onto your device, and then it opens. So now that CUI has, I'll call it, escaped in some way, right? And now it's saved in the download folder or the temporary folder on your computer, and immediately that device has to have the 110 requirements applied to it. And then can get worse, because if those laptops are connected to the rest of your regular network, your company network, and so there are, wireless or wired connections into your company network from the laptop that you viewed the CUI on, you could unintentionally bring your entire network in scope, and your assessor could follow that trail and see that you're viewing documents in your browser. And by definition, it's accessible on that computer, even though you're outside the enclave, which might make it accessible to the rest of your network. And all of a sudden, you're in hot water with your assessment. And what you thought you were doing was narrowing the scope, and you didn't really protect the boundaries. That's just a really key area to understand. How am I going to see or view or use or print documents that are in my enclave? Now, one way that's done is through virtual computers, virtual desktops, as I mentioned earlier, with AWS GovCloud, the one we're most familiar with. AWS provides you a little program called a client that you install on a device that you want to access the vault from. And that device ensures that when you're viewing a document, you're not bringing that document onto your computer. It's staying in the virtual environment. And the document, it's not a browser. It's not the way it works. So it keeps the document on the enclave, in the enclave, and your local machine becomes kind of a dumb terminal. In other words, it's just for viewing, right? Or just for accessing the vault, at least from that client. And no CUI is ever transferred. But you've really got to carefully understand what happens when you're accessing documents from your vault or the vault or any enclave, and make sure that the documents isn't transferred when you're viewing or editing or using the documentation. And that can cause difficulties in your assessment. It could raise the cost immediately of your certification. So being careful of the boundaries, and they call it leakage. Don't let those documents leak outside your enclave into the client, the machine that you're using to access, and then open it up to your whole network, because all of a sudden your scope is not what you thought it was going to be. And you may end up rescheduling your assessment when you're in the middle of the assessment, if that were the case. I think that's another way to say you failed the audit, but I'm trying to say that.
Yeah,
So
that
it's something to be careful
sounds
of.
bad.
It's bad. Yeah.
Okay. So before we wrap up, Rick, can you share how a company can align the budget with their compliance timeline?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. We can look at it from a phase, quarterly approach. So phase one or quarter one, you would do your self-assessment and scoping activities. We talked about those in detail earlier. So that would be quarter one or phase one. Phase two then is your technical upgrades, dealing with your documentation. So that could be a second quarter activity that you would do. Phase three would be to do a mock audit or assessment, if you will, and final preps. So you would walk through looking at all of the assessment objectives, making sure that you have artifacts that you mapped to those 320 assessment objectives, so that you're ready for that assessment with that C3PAO. Your goal is to hit your SPUR score milestones early to stay competitive, and spreading your cost out across quarters to avoid that budget crunch, if you will. So take a phased or a quarterly approach to this activity.
Okay, great advice. And for those with small teams and limited IT staff, what's the best path forward? Rick, what's your top advice for small teams with limited technical staff?
Yeah, I would start and highly recommend using an Enclave as a service. Once again, there's a lot of cost involved if you don't have IT in-house. Now you have to hire someone. There's training involved with that as well. So once again, an Enclave is a great solution for very small companies. Template policies that you can customize for your own particular needs. Why start from scratch? Use something that you can have as a baseline to configure. And then engage with trusted advisors or consultants to help you define scope, to avoid those mistakes that are commonly made. And above all things, you want to start now. You really don't have a lot of time to waste right now. Things are moving ahead. It's not a question whether or not CMMC is going to be a real thing. It's here. So start now if you can.
Great. All right, so let's close out with some next steps. We like to do that on the show here. Scott, what should attendees do in the next 30, 60, 90 days?
Yeah, I'll overlap a bit with what Rick was suggesting, but maybe add a couple of new points here. The first one is in the next 30 days, if you haven't yet submitted a score on the SPRS database, the Supplier Performance Risk System database. This is not specifically related to CMMC. It's related more to DFARS compliance. You are required to do a self-assessment on an annual basis and submit the number of points, if you will, that represent the controls that you've put in place based on NIST 800-171. So there are 110 controls. So a perfect score would be 110. And there's a scoring system you have to use that is kind of harsh. It's kind of it's not grading on a curve. It's a pretty strict grading scale there. But the SPRS score is a way for the DoD to get a sense for how, have you begun? Are you making progress even before you're certified? So you can't today be eligible to bid on a defense contract without a SPRS score in the database. So we have other webinars that have discussed SPRS score. Check out our website or YouTube channel for that information if you're not clear about that. But SPRS score helps you can be part of an assessment, your gap assessment in many regards, and begin to determine the direction you're going to go with scope. Secondly, jump on your policy and documentation development, jump on some of your technical controls, and then 90 days out, really nail down your roadmap for compliance, set a timeline for your assessment. That at least gets you pointed into the right direction so that you can really use that 12 to 18 month time frame for preparation. That's typical, especially if you're going to upgrade your network and maintain things internally. You can expect that. If you're using an Enclave, the timeline changes dramatically and can be, you could be fully compliant in a shorter period of time, 2 or 3 months on the outside if you really needed to get after this. That's one of the great advantages of using an Enclave.
Okay, great. Thanks. Good practical steps there, Scott. So I guess finally, what would you say to someone who's feeling overwhelmed about the cost and complexity of CMMC? What's your last piece of advice for small businesses trying to make CMMC compliance affordable? Rick, that one's for you.
Sure. Once again, smart scoping. What does that mean? It means we're limiting our boundaries to help us save time, reduce cost, and effort. So that is a key first step. Secondly, that Enclave. Keep in mind, I guess you could say an Enclave is your friend. because it's saving you time and effort and cost. And it's simplifying putting a compliant environment out there. As we talked numerous times, a phased approach. Don't try to tackle it necessarily all at one time. It could be very costly to you, but do a phased approach, one step at a time, and making sure that you have a SPUR score that is accurate in the DoD's database there. And I think finally, use free and low-cost resources like your Apex Accelerator, MEP centers, Project Spectrum, and even policy templates can help you make real progress without spending a fortune. And ultimately, the last thing to say for this is don't wait. You should have started already, and if you haven't, you want to start now meeting these requirements.
Okay, great advice today, guys. All right, well, thanks again to everyone for joining us today. We hope this session gave you a clearer path for making CMMC compliance more affordable, especially through the use of smart scoping, enclave strategies, and phased budgeting. Whether you're just beginning to prepare or trying to rein in costs midstream, focusing your efforts can make all the difference. As a quick reminder, here are your next steps. Start with your SPUR score, know your current position, define your CUI boundary and narrow your scope, explore enclave options to reduce cost and complexity, build a 12 to 18 month roadmap, and phase your investments. If you need help, reach out to your local Apex Accelerator or MEP. They're here to support your journey. And of course, you can contact us at Core Business Solutions. We're always ready to assist you with gap assessments, documentation, enclave support, and our cloud-based Core Vault designed to simplify and accelerate CMMC compliance. Before we close, don't miss our June webinar, CMMC in the Cloud, Navigating Cloud Provider Options for Compliance. We'll unpack the differences between GCC, GCC High, and commercial cloud, and how to make the right choice for protecting CUI in a compliant environment. Be sure to visit our website and YouTube channel for more CMMC tips and tools. Thanks again, and we'll see you next month.